And then he turned to me and he said, I hear about people. I hear that some people are not letting their parents see their grandkids, that some parents are not letting their own parents see their grandkids because of politics. And I wonder if that will ever happen to us. And the instant reaction from me was to say in Spanish, never, jamás, papi. That will never happen to us. And then I thought about it and I realized I just made a promise. I just made a commitment. I better hold to that.
Polarization is the issue of our time, of this moment, not only in the United States, but around the globe. Our inability to come together and find common ground, or even to talk to people who disagree with us, even within our own families. I would argue we are polarized and paralyzed. Polarized so we can't find common ground and get things done, and paralyzed even with those we love the most to talk about our differences. If that interests you, you're going to love this podcast, where we explore with Mónica Guzmán, author of I Never Thought of It That Way, how we can become less polarized and talk about our differences. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Dr. John Izzo, and welcome to this episode of the Way Forward Cross Gen podcast, where millennials and baby boomers take on the issues of our time and once in a while take on each other. So, Polina, great to see you. How's life in Wisconsin this morning?
Hey, John, and everybody. Things are going good. It's a little gloomy, but we're starting to see through the moodiness of April into May and getting a few of those warm days. So definitely enjoying that sunshine. How about you?
Yeah, good. Overcast here in the Northwest. And our guest happens to be from the Northwest today, too. So we're used to it, but it's been sunny lately. So look, today we're really tackling in this episode together, I think one of the most important issues actually of this moment, not just in the United States, but around the globe, which is this growing polarization, the division that has really driven a stake between us. And more importantly, it's a division that is really about our inability to talk about our differences. And as I was thinking about this podcast, I was thinking about two experiences. One is, as our listeners know, I'm a tennis player. I play competitive tennis. So about a year ago or so, in the last year of Biden's term. And so we're playing tennis, and these are people I play with all the time. But of course, we never talk about politics. But suddenly somebody brought up the price of gas, which is ironic given what's happening right now. And they started saying that it was Biden's fault that the gas. And I kind of just said, well, it's really more complicated than that. And within like a nanosecond, and I'm not exaggerating, the decibels went up and people were yelling at each other. And I didn't even know where people were politically, and they're literally yelling at me. And then the other guy who I was quiet for a moment, he started yelling at them. And then he said, okay, Democrats versus Republicans. And he dragged me so that we would play doubles against these other two guys. And they literally hitting balls like at each other. And I said, guys, this is like tennis. But what really occurred to me was not only couldn't we talk, but like the trigger was just waiting. And then the other thing I thought about is a really good friend of mine. I won't say her name because I don't, because of what I'm about to say, but she's really close with her sister. But politics drove such a wedge between them that it was ruining their relationship until they finally decided, okay, we're just not going to talk about those things. And I was thinking about when I was a kid, and many of us heard this, our parents said, it's two things you should never talk about: politics and religion. And I was thinking, what is, other than our relationships, two of the most important things in our lives are our faith, however we define that, what we believe about the world and what we think about society. And we're literally at a time where even within our own families, we've just had to agree, let's not talk about the most important things.
Yeah, John, that's really powerful, both of those examples. And I'm certain that many of us would be able to identify in certain situations to those. What I'm thinking in addition to that is that the divisiveness has really transcended age boundaries. And I say this from a parental lens. I have two young daughters. One is in middle school and one in elementary. And just recently, I have a kind of a very vivid example where at school for my oldest daughter, they have in social studies current events wrap up where they watch news, and I'm unsure of the station, I'm unsure the source material, to be honest, but they watch this wrap up about domestic and international events. And of course, right now, and what has dominated the news have been things surrounding immigration, ICE, the war in Ukraine, and of course, the war in Iran. And what at some point in watching those events, she had come home looking upset. And I had asked her what maybe had happened. And she said she had an interaction on the bus with her peers, where after watching this wrap up, one of the boys had brought up that Russians, which is my native country, of course, as you know, and it are not good people, that they had started this war and that they are not welcome here in the United States. And she had two reactions to this. One, she was tearful and said she felt bad for me as an immigrant from the country, and that she knew in her lived experience in the real world, interacting with myself and, of course, her grandmother, that is not the case, that those negative things do not represent what her experience is. But the second thing that kind of really spurred me was that she said she couldn't stand up for herself. And she said, I didn't feel comfortable saying anything. I was afraid to say something. And so I didn't do that. And I feel guilty. And I think that that really raises a question, parental question of how do I teach my child to have a difficult conversation surrounding a sensitive issue at that age? And really, how do we start that in the home? And what impact, our communities and the greater nation or education system have in impacting this type of, divisiveness at such an early age?
Well, fortunately for us and our guests, we and our audience, we have a great guest this morning. Want to welcome into the Way Forward studio, Mónica Guzmán, the author of I Never Thought of It That Way, How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. Mónica, welcome.
Hi, how's it going? Hey.
Great, wonderful. And hey, a great book and an important book. And I want to start really getting right into it because you tell in the book a very personal story in your own family of what got you. You're a journalist, you've been a writer or speaker, but that got you into the space to want to write a book like this. So tell us about that experience in your own family that really brought this all on.
Yeah, we are a family of Mexican immigrants, came over when I was very young, 5, 6 years old. And by the year 2000, we became citizens. And around the 2016 campaign, all hell broke loose in my family, as it did with so many that are on opposite sides. And there was a moment where I was walking with my dad, and we were not really talking about politics, but it was hanging in the air because it was election day. It was election day 2020. And he's kind of a quiet guy, but there was this beat of silence between us. And then he turned to me and he said, I hear about people. I hear that some people are not letting their parents see their grandkids, that some parents are not letting their own parents see their grandkids because of politics. And I wonder if that will ever happen to us. And this came as an absolute, it just stunned me. I think I robotically kind of kept walking, but in my head, my heart was just pounding because I didn't realize that my dad would be thinking about that. But that was kind of my nightmare, that we would ever get to the point where I would want to push him away that much, or that he would be so afraid of that. And the instant reaction from me was to say in Spanish, never, jamás, papi. That will never happen to us. And it was one of those where the words came out before the thinking. And then I thought about it and I realized I just made a promise. I just made a commitment. I better hold to that. Yeah. So my family's divisions and arguments about politics are a big part of what brought me to this work.
What happened next? Give us a sense of your journey. So, okay, you have this epiphany. My God, this could happen. Like part of what I hear you saying, yes, that could, Papa never, but it could happen, right? In some way. So, what happened next in terms of your journey to do this particular kind of work?
Well, I had been a journalist my whole career. I still am. I still love telling stories. I spent years as a beat reporter and in communities, big and small. And one of the things I learned through my career was how easy it is to get people wrong, how easy it is to be misperceiving other people. It was remarkable how many times I came into interviews thinking, I already know the story. I just need a quote. And then I would get the truth by actually, being with somebody and trying to hear them on their own terms, which was always difficult, especially when I was anxious because a deadline was coming up or something like that. So when political division hit my family and then hit my whole country and was starting to tear relationships apart, I realized that these things are connected. It's so easy to get each other wrong all the time. And it's especially easy to get each other wrong when we are suspicious and distrustful, when we disagree, when we have motivated reasoning pushing us one way or the other. We want to believe the worst of people who disagree with us, especially because the moral valence of our disagreements is so high. So if I'm the good guy, the person who disagrees with me must be the bad guy, because if they're good, then what am I? And we just set binaries everywhere. It becomes very difficult and very anxiety inducing and kind of scary. So what happened next was I realized I think I need to do something about this. And at the time I was doing journalism, and that was great because I thought I want to help people understand each other. But journalism and media became so splintered and siloed on all of these different dividing lines that I thought, you know what, I need to step out of this and go into the layer underneath everything. And so I worked on my book, and it's been a few years since then, and there's just been so much more to work on. I have a podcast called A Braver Way where we're constantly exploring this. And it really, my mission is, what are the tools that help us see each other, help us build a world that sees itself, a curious world? And how do we make them more accessible? What can I do to find them and then show them, get them out there, because it's getting pretty rough.
Monica, I just love that you took action and actually decided to turn something, an event, an experience into that way forward and kind of looking at this deeper. And you mentioned your book as well as the component of siloing that you discussed. But one of the aspects along with siloing that really stood out to me in the book is this sorting tendency, where we are really looking to identify with individuals that maybe who think like us or vote like us or ingest social media like us. And I think you also mentioned this interesting component that it's really the removal of these accidental spaces where people with diverse views can come together and share those views and have a natural conversation that may have impact on additional divisiveness. And so I'm really curious from your perspective in the lens of families across generations, specifically thinking of younger generations that are no longer maybe staying in that family unit, maybe as compared to some other countries where you're living with your parents and grandparents a little bit longer. And so removal of that cross-generational sharing and knowledge, what happens to our empathy? What happens to our understanding when we stop living alongside people who see the world in a different way?
Yeah. And so the research on this is really profound. And one way to sum it up is that when we surround ourselves with people who share our instincts, we will also share our blind spots. So any kind of sorting into like-minded or similarly interested or demographically similar groups, that dynamic is going to happen. We also know from the research, for example, that when you surround yourself with people who share your opinion, as a group, you tend to all kind of become a little more radical in your opinion. And by radical, I mean it in the classic sense of more sort of pure, whatever that one core thing is that you all believe. You will want to take more steps and more actions to further it. So diversity, right? Like diversity is a celebrated virtue, comes in many forms. My friend Ibu Patel likes to say, diversity is not just the differences you like. It's all the differences. So when it comes to generational divides, society has always struggled with that. We have more communitarian societies. We have more individualistic societies. And it's hard to think of a more individualistic society than the United States of America. People we go to college, we're already living away from home. That's the norm. And then we're off and we go wherever. It's very easy to begin to make assumptions about the generation older than you. And then vice versa, if you're the older generation, my parents live in a 55 plus community. They're having a blast. It's really great, but they're spending less and less time with people who are younger than them as well. It's easier to just misattribute, the motives of younger people, or you go to the news and it's like, oh, Generation Y is ruining the world in this way. And you go, yeah, they really are. And you just don't, you have less time with people in those groups who check whatever narratives you are absorbing in your world. So you have fewer checks on all of those things. So that the healthiest, diverse society is one where very organically we are colliding with each other, at our kids' baseball practice, at like some kind of community center, out on the street, in the grocery store. You're meeting enough different people. Your friends group crosses divides in certain ways. We know politically that's happening less and less. Blue zip codes are getting bluer, red zip codes are getting redder. There's very understandable reasons for that. But generationally speaking, this is a perennial challenge. So that's why Thanksgiving feels like there's so much pressure on it. People are actually coming together across generations. This is your chance to either hold on to your assumptions and just give the side eye to those, old fogies or those young idiots, or actually ask some questions and see what you're missing.
You said a couple of things that really struck me. Take them one at a time. One is when we hang out with people who agree with us, we become more radical. And I love what you said, in the true sense of radical, meaning we become even more convicted that we have the truth, whatever the truth is, right? And so we start to fence out other things. And then I also begin to think, this is my tribe. So if I in any way then express something that isn't aligned with my tribe, I kind of get kicked out of the tribe, right? And so if I hang out with mostly people who agree with me, and then I happen to have an idea that doesn't agree with the tribe, like antibodies, the tribe will come after me. And I want to ask you a question about that, because I think fear is a part of the basis of that. So part of it is our natural tribal tendency. But of course, about the theory of cognitive dissonance. Human beings like order. We like our view of the world and ourselves to be stable. So whenever there's dissonance and something challenges that, it's very uncomfortable for us. We're actually afraid that if we engage in a real conversation with someone, they might actually change our mind. In which case, now both our tribal identity and our self-identity are threatened. So talk a little bit about what happens inside of us that makes it so difficult for us to have those conversations.
It's so internal. We tend to focus on, okay, conversation, it's the script, it's what I say to this other person, it's this external thing to myself, but it all begins and ends with the internal. So my friend David McRaney is an amazing researcher on the science of persuasion, and he sums up a key piece of the science of persuasion by saying that our fear of social death is greater than our fear of physical death, which is kind of nuts when you think about it, but it is. So the sense of belonging, the threat to our identity and who we're connected to, we've evolved socially. It's deeply threatening, and in a way that is automatic. It's in a way that your body will pick up before your mind. So a lot about what it means to go inside and build resilience, to allow yourself to be curious when it's hard, to allow yourself to ask questions like, wait, what am I missing? When all, systems are firing inside you going, fear, 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 fear. Let's survive. Let's survive. Let's survive. Let's make sure that we maintain our social connections at all costs. Whatever is reasonable or logical comes secondary to that. When those things start firing, we tend to just become reactive. So again, our bodies kind of take over, our emotions take over. They might run away with us a little bit, but only because we don't notice. These things tend to happen subconsciously. The thing that changes that whole dynamic is noticing. So, is your heart starting to beat a certain way? Do you get that thump of somebody just punched you and now you're afraid? Okay. If you notice that and you take a beat, you pause, you take a breath, everything changes, because now you can recover your agency. Now you can decide, all right, wait a minute. Am I going to do what my anger would just have me do at this point? Am I going to do what my fear would have me do at this point, which might be shut down, run away, lie, just to take the threat and set it aside? Or can I find something that is more proactive, more independent, more fearless? And again, that is difficult, but because our fear of social death is greater than our fear of physical death, we can very easily exaggerate the actual threat. Most of this is, it's just our brain trying to, it's our body trying to protect us. That's what fear is. So we just have to talk to it. We have to question our fear. And that's very difficult and very uncomfortable, but it's almost always rewarding, you know? Like you'll know true danger, like someone's going to hit you with a club. Okay, get out of there. But somebody disagrees with you is going to feel like they're going to hit you with a club. They're not going to hit you with a club. This is a conversation. So anyway, we can talk more about what other steps you can take, but that's the basic, is become aware.
So Monica, this sounds very cellular level, biologically fight or flight. And I think, you know, in your book, you do center gravity around this concept of curiosity as a means to get through some of that fear, or how to handle this maybe in a better way. And so you describe it really like a discipline. So curiosity as a discipline versus a personality trait. And you talk about it as a skill set that we need to practice and lean into to help us have these difficult conversations. And so from a kind of, again, a parental lens for me specifically, I would look at the level of polarization that and social division that exists. You know, the bigger question for me for the future is, how do we raise children who are capable of having hard conversations without immediately defaulting to maybe fear or avoidance, and instead practicing curiosity? And so maybe lead us in a little bit of your perception, what curiosity is, and then also how do we help shape our next generations to be more curious so that they're more prepared to have these conversations.
Yeah, curiosity is awesome. It's often thought of as the knowledge emotion because it comes with a feeling oftentimes, but the feelings can vary. If you are curious about something because you're anxious about it, it can be like an itch you can't scratch. You know, I got to find it. Or it can be an adventure, interest-based curiosity, the researchers call it, where, you know, one thing that you've learned leads to more questions. And so then you follow that and then, more questions and then you're just delightfully learning. It's pretty great. And neurologically, what's fun about it is that it creates this sort of pull. It creates this craving to fill in the gap, to you've understood that there's something you're missing that you want. And so then that desire pulls at your brain, and then you take actions to try to learn. It's pretty cool. So then we have to look at, well, what keeps curiosity from working? It's the things that cover over that gap. As long as your attention is on the gap between what you know and what you want to know, then you can be curious. But many things can cover over that gap, including our assumptions. So assumptions are answers to questions we never asked. They are forms of certainty. Certainty is the arch villain of curiosity, because if you think you know, why would you ask? Right? So when we're caught in our biases, when we're sorted and siloed and all this thing, and when we're afraid of not belonging or being judged, you know, when fear comes in, then boy, we don't want to be curious. We want to be safe. So we end up in different directions. So your question about kids, the reaction we tend to have when curiosity feels unsafe, or, you know, assumptions are out there cycling and we don't know that we really fit, but we're not sure what we can do, is we want to get defensive. And so I think the thing to model for kids and to coach them on is how questions can add pauses and beats and grounding to a small group conversation, to a one-on-one conversation. Asking a question is almost always useful. One, because it lets everybody take a breath, especially if things are escalating emotionally. Two, because it builds that time for folks to be like, wait, what's really going on? And everybody can kind of get grounded. And three, and maybe most important, you get to add information. So you're asked a question or somebody confronts you with something. One of the first questions you should ask back, instead of getting defensive, is go, what do you mean by that? Can you say more about what you mean by that? You can even, you know, say something about how you feel, honestly, and then follow it with a question. You know, that hits me kind of hard. But before I explore that, can you tell me more about why you're asking? So I have two kids, a 13-year-old and 11-year-old. And oftentimes they'll come home from school and they'll ask me something or they'll tell me something where my instinct to just teach them, just show them how to think, comes in. I'm their mother. I'm the authority figure. I can fix them. I can fix whatever's going on in their world. And I have to swallow that instinct. And I go, no, 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 no. What you want to do, Mom, actually, is train them to be a good citizen. That means you want them to be curious. And that means you want them to know their own mind and heart. So I play that role with them, right? Instead of, getting defensive insofar as I would say, oh, I don't want them to think the wrong way. Let me tell them what they should think. It's how did you feel when he said that? What have you ever met anybody in that group that they were talking about? Start to ask questions, start to slow it down, and help kids realize that they have the ingredients inside of them to slow down, to explore, to inquire, to recognize the things that they're missing.
I have one follow-up thought to that. So I really love that open-ended questions, really getting to know your child too.
Yeah.
Because I think we're all maybe, and this is an assumption, but our parents, as we parent, we lead children sort of in either a similar direction we want them to go or away from our childhood as to not repeat certain traumas, right? So we usually, as a parent, you have two lenses you're trying to work through to make it better. One book I'm reading adjacently is called, Raising Critical Thinkers. And the big thought around there is about how to stimulate us to have critical thought about the information we see, the information we ingest. How do we ask more questions about the information so that we can make a better decision about that? And I actually have sort of a question for John on this too. When we think about generational differences in this aspect, sometimes the perception millennial or younger generations have is that our older generations are set in their ways, that they've stopped being curious, that they've stopped asking questions because they've lived in that experience. That's the world that they see and, know. And sometimes it's harder to enter into conversations when we're trying to be curious, but instead we're reflected back maybe with a mirror of more of that closed-mindedness. So in perception with Monica's like storytelling aspect and trying to storytell, how do you think, or what kind of approaches do you think we can have in at those dinners, at that Thanksgiving, to try to engage across the generation, reach towards my, parents, my grandparents, to have like a little bit more openness?
Yeah, I was thinking a quick response to that. I mean, I think one of two things happens to people generally as they get older. They either get more curious because they realize how much they don't know, or they get more set in their ways, right? And I think that the smartest older people stay curious because we often see the lens of the world. We talked about that in our last podcast, if you remember, Polina, about, Morris Massey's work. You are where you were when. So we have like a generational lens, and that lens becomes the lens through which we see the whole world. And it's sometimes hard to change that lens, right? But we probably want to go too far into the generational piece, but I think that it's all going back to this curiosity, right, is the key. And I was thinking, Monica, and I love you really hinted at this, Polina and I both spent a lot of time in the business world. And, one of the models I used for years is a model called productive conversations, which is how do you know if you're having a productive conversation with someone? And what's a productive conversation? To me, and you hinted at it, a productive conversation is one in which both of us learn something and we're more likely to either find common ground or take concerted action afterwards together, right? So, and what I love about the model and love your response to it is the model says that here's how you know you're not having a productive conversation. If I am debating, meaning I'm trying to debate and make my point, or defending my point of view, it's not a productive conversation. But if I am asking questions, if I'm actually curious about how you see the world and why you've come to that conclusion and what you would like to see, or however you frame it, or informing you why I see the world the way I do, that's a productive conversation because you're learning about how I see the world and I'm learning how you see the world. What I like about that model is I think you can put yourself in any conversation and know whether you're in the productive zone. If I'm debating, I'm defending, it's not going to be a productive conversation. If I'm asking and informing, we might have a productive conversation. What's your thought on that? And here, I guess what I'm getting is, how does an individual know when they're in the middle of one and move themselves into a productive conversation, especially given these fiery issues?
Yeah, no, you're totally nailing it. And the back end principle, I think, here is that to have the most productive conversation about an issue, you need to be really curious about the person, the people who are in the conversation. Start there, root yourselves there. A lot of times we think, well, probably the path toward not taking some argument too personally is to just make sure we're not talking about each other, that we're not asking questions about each other, including questions about how each other constructs the world or where they're coming from. Let's not make it personal. But I think it's actually backwards, that when you are putting a conversation in that space of, I want to know, I think you should understand how I look at things, because that will help you understand how I look at this, right? And then vice versa. Like, I need to understand how you look at things so that I understand how you look at this. Now you're talking. Now there's this like tacit acknowledgement that we're different people. And a lot of times when we get too cerebral too quickly, we just drop the human out of the equation. And it becomes too much a showdown of this opinion versus that opinion with nothing underneath. It's like it's floating up and it's abstract and it's amorphous and it's not valuable. It's just not useful. So the question, how did you come to believe what you believe, is so powerful. It's so powerful. I use it all the time. It's a better question than why do you believe what you believe? That's a perfectly curious question. But when there's division and mistrust, it can make someone feel like they're being put on the spot. They're being put on trial. People will hear that question, why do I believe what I believe? And what they'll actually hear it as is, I need to prove I matter. And so then it becomes, at all costs, I'm going to defeat you and feel like I'm going to be okay at the end of this. And then you're not really talking about whatever you're arguing about at all. You ever been in those conversations where it feels like you're supposed to be arguing about immigration, but 5 minutes in and for the rest of the hour, you're clearly just trying to prove that each other matters. And that's it. And you start attacking each other's character and stuff like that. So
I hope you're enjoying this conversation we're having about polarization in our families, in our lives, and in America. And we'll get back to it in just a moment. But meanwhile, I want to thank you for being a part of our community and a part of our podcast family. And I want to encourage you to be in touch with us. Please subscribe on every channel that you're on so that you won't miss any episode. Please share it with family and friends and spread the good news, if you will. And go to our website, wayforwardpodcast.com, where you'll see our link tree. You can even buy a coffee and support us if you'd like. So thank you for being a part of our family. We'd love to hear from you, wayforwardpodcast.com. Now let's get back to our conversation with Monica.
really certain on something set in their ways, the answer is still ask about the person. For example, if I know someone who's super, super certain on something and they're very inflexible, I will ask myself, what do they love? What's something they really enjoy? Like a hobby, a passion? I'll ask them about that first. Like, oh, you love to fish. Tell me about your trip last week. Oh, you got how many? How long have you been doing this? When was the first time you went fishing? Oh, it was with your dad. How did you learn the different kinds of bait? How did that work? And you get into this place of where learning is obvious. Then you come back to that topic. And they've just told you about how they've learned something they love. They're going to be a little more curious about anything that obviously takes time and steps to get somewhere. So anyway, curiosity is amazing. It's like this Pandora's box of so many cool stuff, so much cool stuff. Although Pandora's box is negative, so that's not the best analogy.
Yeah, well,
Anyway.
Pandora's box is the box you don't want to open. It might not be negative, but you don't want to open it. And, I love Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, said, the door you're most afraid to open is where the treasure is. And I think sometimes we forget that if I open the door of curiosity, even if I'm afraid, so I like you said Pandora's box, that box might be the place of learning, of mutual understanding, of relationship building. And I loved something, that question about how do you stay curious when someone else doesn't want to be curious. And I'll go back to that productive conversation model. Well, sometimes when you try to be curious and they're not, you go back to defending or arguing.
Right.
But you can then lean even more deeply into, you can inform them. Well, let me tell you the experience that I had that makes me see immigration this way. Right? Said people are less likely to argue with your experience when you're informing. I'm not trying to convince you that you're wrong. I'm trying to help you understand how I've come to this conclusion, right? So
Exactly.
I think you can self-monitor, pull yourself back in. But let's go a couple levels up here now, because we've been talking more about how you do this interpersonally. But let's now talk about how do we scale this in a society that is so polarized. So what are some of your thoughts on that? Because obviously it's paralyzing the whole society. We can't get things done. We're not solving problems that need to be solved. We just pendulum back and forth, and like a wrecking ball to each other. So what are your thoughts on some initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is where courage becomes really important. We always have the option not to talk about politics, not to talk about religion with anyone because it's just uncomfortable. And then, that can be the healthy option. Absolutely. What I hope is that people pendulate. What I hope is that even folks who feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so exhausted, or I can't, that they still stay curious about the moments when they can. Is there something? Is there a situation? Is there a person? Is there a one-on-one conversation that feels safe enough? Is there some place where you can, you know, speak up, have your voice heard, be the engager, be somebody who can spark the productive conversation? It doesn't have to be on all things at all levels at all times. That's crazy. But just one click more curious is going to make a difference. I think right now we're in a time when people are opting for one of two poles. And this is a gross generalization, but I think it's useful. Either numb or outraged. And we've got to find a middle way. We've got to find something in between there. There's understandable reasons why people are outraged. There's understandable reasons why people are numb. But it can begin even with curiosity there. If you're numb, get curious about that. What led you to that? What did you become afraid of? Where did the walls go up? And where you see that wall, now ask yourself about your values. Ask yourself about what you care about. Is that wall keeping you from living some of your values? Is it keeping you from engaging deeply with some of the relationships you care about the most? I think a lot about people who tell me, my family decided to stop talking about politics, but I care so much about politics. I'm thinking about one particular woman in the Midwest who was telling me about this. My dad told me I can't, let's stop talking about politics. It's just too contentious. But for her, there's several political issues that are so deeply important to her that it was basically like her dad saying, I don't want to talk about you. Let's stop talking about you. So anyway, we're going to need courage in some of these places. We're going to need to open ourselves to risk, vulnerability. But on the citizen level, there has to be enough of us who are willing to take the risks, the social death risks, the belonging risks, the judgment risks. And what I see is that as people get brave and try this, the results are far, far, far better than they feared. Our fears are usually painting a nightmare scenario that isn't real. So, it can start with something really safe, just a one-to-one on something you care about. Go get coffee with that person. And then is there an action the two of you can take? Can she connect you to somebody else? And then you start like working on it, something in your community. It also doesn't have to be the big national crazy stuff. In a lot of ways, we are more powerful on the ground. So I don't know. It depends on what you care about. If it's about repairing your relationships, then that takes a lot of courage. If it's about making sure that within your relationships, you're showing up honestly, that takes a lot of courage. And then if you want to try to change something about the world, but political division is getting in the way, start small, look for those one-to-one conversations, look for those places where people can be curious, and then begin by setting that tone. And it is contagious and it'll start to come back to you.
Yeah, Monica, something that's really speaking to me, and again, from John's perspective of more of the macro, when we look at the societal level, I think would be remiss if we don't venture into talking about social media and AI.
Yeah.
You also mentioned the removal of the human aspect, or, how do we have good conversation is you ask about the person, you reach for the person. And I think what, the current state of the art, us, again, either being numb or outraged, social media and AI generated content, the algorithmic spirals we could get down to, rage bait concepts, all those things add additional misinformation pressure and that sorting concept we talked about as well. And so I think that it's important for us to recognize that, of course, in that type of system, that emotional response seems to be rewarded first over a reflective or a logical one. Mm-hmm. And then we really are kind of numbed to the ability to stay curious or critically think through issues. And so I'm just wondering, in your, experience, whether personal, professional, online, or in person, have you had an interaction or a situation where you felt like the social media and the digital culture that we have really has made more of a caricature of ourselves, having that inability to connect, and maybe where really you're thinking to yourself, "Why we're just losing the ability to see one another." What was that like? What did you take away from that?
I mean, it happens all the time. It happens less now because I'm personally spending a lot less time on social media. I wrote in the book something that I think is just more and more true every day, which is that the internet is a non-place that makes us into non-people. It's hard to be grounded when there's no body, when there's no presence. It's us using words, these concepts, this imperfect technology of language to represent ourselves in 140 characters or like a tiny little bio or whatever. And we start to say things like unfollow if you disagree. We start to make barriers. And then, as you said, the incentives of these social media spaces, they're all about rewarding whatever's going to mobilize sharing and more attention. So the people who are really good at this know how to get people's, hackles up. And the bad part about that is it's exactly the kinds of psychology that pull us away from curiosity. So what I think is unhealthy is the balance. It's not social media itself. It's, you person A, are you on social media all the time? Like, if you take the whole volume of your communication with other people, what percentage of it happens online? What percentage of it is you typing something, right? What percentage of it is you on the phone? Is you in person? So what I talk about is change the ratio, because as long as you are having conversations that are back and forth, that are synchronous, because that's so important. Synchronous, meaning they're happening at the same time. And so you're in that live unpredictability where curiosity is necessary, right? And where all of the tools of human communication are brought to bear. You've got my gestures, my tone, my voice, everything is working in the favor of understanding. So if you have enough of that in your real life, then the internet is, and even social media is fantastic. You make all these kind of connections. You get this broad survey of different opinions. I mean, it's a blessing. It's incredible what social media and internet give us. What is not healthy is that they pulls us away from extraordinarily healthy behaviors that we are doing less because of the addictive qualities of social media. So that's where I want to put the focus.
A couple of things I want to pick up on. One is the two really interesting experiments going on X, formerly Twitter right now. One is called Community Thoughts. And what it is that if something is posted that someone says, this is misinformation, it's not quite true, it's an outright lie, whatever, is that what the platform now does is if people who normally disagree with each other start to like and agree that this is misinformation, the platform now raises it. So rather than the algorithm rewarding disagreement, it's rewarding when people across the spectrum agree with something, it's raising it. The other experiment they're doing right now that's even more interesting to me is that right now the algorithm is all social media algorithms are built to reward outrage and anger. So those things get up. And so they're playing at X. They have no idea if it's going to work now, of when they find posts that people across who normally disagree with or agree with, the algorithm is starting to promote those posts so more people see it. Right. So there is the potential with the right intention for us to, because the thing is, I agree with you, we need to do more in person, of course, but we're not going to, social media is not going to go away. So we're going to have to use AI and these kind of tools to help us find common ground. But I want to go back to this personal piece, because you said something in your book that really resonated with an experience I had. A friend of mine, Dan, used to be in the Reagan administration, moderate Republican. I'm kind of a moderate Democrat. People who listen all the time know that. And one of the interesting things is that he then went to run the National Federation of Independent Business for years. And I asked him, what's different now than when you were in Washington as an insider in the 1980s? He said two fundamental differences. One is it used to be that you could compromise and you weren't running for office 24/7. Now the internet will attack you the moment you even suggest disagreeing with your own party. So the antibodies attack you. The second thing he said, to your point, he said, is it used to be that the congressmen, almost all of them lived in Washington. Their kids went to school in Washington. They would, disagree on the floor and then hang out at the soccer match on Friday night and watch their kids they were real human beings who had real conversations and relationships. And he said now almost all of them live in their districts. They fly into Washington. And you said in your book, I didn't even know that. That's now only 3 days a week they meet in Washington, which is probably to make it easier so they can just go home. So it really reinforces how now, even at the highest levels, we've created an environment where we don't have to see each other as human beings, which of course is going to move us almost into social media caricatures, even of people we're with in person.
Yes, no, that's right. And that's happening across society. I travel a lot. So at the airport, I'm just noticing how many fewer interactions I need to make with people to get something to eat before my flight. It's all automated. And AI, of course, is just, for some people, boy, it's just such a good listener. It's better than people. It doesn't have its own messes. It doesn't have its own problems that I need to tend to. It can just tend to me. So yeah, I find this cringy beyond belief. I use AI to help, with all kinds of things, but anything that takes us away from each other threatens to deepen all these dynamics that are tearing us apart. Anything. And that doesn't mean, don't be excited about AI. It doesn't mean don't use social media. I think what it means, though, is notice how much presence you allow yourself in the company of real human beings in real conversation. We know, for example, that even longevity, the big, big studies on longevity show us that people live really long and are really healthy when they have great relationships. So to the extent that technology and silos within our human communities pull us away from a wider range and variety of human experience, then our relationships are going to be a little less interesting and informative and challenging. And let's not forget, we often think of kind of diversity, again, externally, being around different people. Well, yes, I get to learn more, whatever. But when you're around different people, you learn more about yourself. Let's be clear about this. This is such an important point. If you're just surrounded by people who are like you, then those things that you share will become invisible to you. You will not understand them at a depth of nuance. You will become more certain and blinded to the complexity within those things. And when another community that does not share that aspect of you comes in and gives that contrast, it can grow violent. It's so separate, right? But if you're constantly colliding with people who are different from you, you get to be asked questions like, wait, that doesn't make sense. Why do you think that? To me, it's more like this. And yes, that's uncomfortable. But what that means is that you now have to explain yourself. And not just to the other person, but to yourself. So a divided world is also a world that knows itself less well. It's not just about seeing the other side. If the other side never gets to come and hang out with you, then you don't get to see your own side anymore. So then we all get dumb. So I think that's really, really important. Yeah, we become more violent. We become more reckless. We become more stupid. And I know that's like a naughty word, but it's true. We become more dumb. So let's pay attention to where we are telling ourselves the story that it is better if we just stay comfortable.
Yeah, Monica, there's a lot to unpack in what you said. I'll make one comment, really just more of a personal reflection. This is something that I think I and maybe, again, my peer group, my friend group struggle with in my age, where we are sort of approaching that midlife point and we're trying to figure out how do we contribute back to society? What's our value actually? Maybe I've checklisted a whole bunch of things about my career, a family, a home, all these things we're supposed to have, but it's hard to find spaces where we can come together in that type of collective and share that type of information or have discussion outside of social media environment. I feel like we're entrenched in it. And I'm hoping that there will be more venues and solutions for us at this age, again, where we can get engaged in a healthy way. It's almost like we need a leader. We need to bring you in and have some leadership in leading these types of conversations with us. So giving us internal permission to ask tough questions and respond in maybe again an uncomfortable way. So this is more my reflection there. But I know as we are close to wrap up, really what John and I are trying to also look at is the hopeful horizon, looking at future, a brighter future, a more healthy future that we can promote and engage our listeners in. And so as we think about that type of a horizon, is there maybe again a story or a reflection you can share with us that gives you genuine hope that we can build a less polarized and more connected future?
Yeah, I think about something called the Trustworthy Elections Project, created by a nonprofit called Braver Angels, which is really just a grassroots community all across the country. So Braver Angels holds these debates where people don't crown a winner and a loser, but people show up and just speak in the affirmative or the negative on a given resolution. There was a really contentious debate on voter fraud after the 2020 election, and I think it was actually after January 6th. And one of the people who came was a man named David Iwinski from Pennsylvania, who really, really, in his heart of hearts, believed that that election, something was way off. Something was very stinky, very fishy. He gave his perspective on the election, that it's something was off, fraud was real. And then he stayed. He was heard for his full 4 minutes by people who agreed and disagreed with him. And he stayed. And he heard on the other side speakers saying things like, the problem isn't voter fraud, it's actually voter suppression. There's folks who are being kind of pushed away from the polls. Turns out David had never really heard that perspective before, and he agreed with it. So at the end of the debate, he thought, we need to look at voter security, at election security, and he also believed we also need to look at voter suppression. So he helped start this project called the Trustworthy Elections Project. And over many months, there were something like 26 workshops all across the country, each workshop with an equal number of conservatives and liberals who came from different directions on elections. They ended up, over the course of all of that, following the structure called the Common Ground Workshop, they found 727 points of agreement. 727 points of agreement on the question, how do we make our elections more trustworthy? And they came up with 3 guiding principles and 27 specific solutions, including make election day a federal holiday. One of the principles was voting should be easy, cheating should be hard, right? These were regular people, not a celebrity or politician among them. That's all it was. They created something called the Trustworthy Elections Report, which is circulating out there in governments all up and down. This is the example of, if you push away the fear, if you reject the idea that you just need to be on social media bloviating, if you get to know people, if you slow it down and get curious and ask yourself and others, what are the concerns really about, instead of, I'm just going to assume I already know what you believe and you're a monster, we can actually solve this stuff. It's actually not that hard. The hard stuff is coming together. But once you do that, oh my gosh, miracles will happen. But of the sort where you go, why weren't we doing this all along? And that's what makes me angry. So I have hope when I see people just do the daring thing.
Well, Monica, we could go on, but time does not allow that. So first of all, Monica, thanks for being with us today. It's a great book. I never thought of it that way. I encourage you to get it. Really important work that you're doing. I was thinking of 2 things, as I was listening to the close. I was thinking of my friend Gil Fiend, who's, believes that climate change is like the existential crisis of our time. And he was about to meet with someone his goal was to change his mind about climate change. And my friend Gil had this thought right before he went to the conversation. He said, do I have the right to try to change his mind if I'm not open to the idea that he might change my mind?
Love it.
And I love what you said about we all get dumber when we're not open to our mind being changed. Mm-hmm. And that last story you told, so profound, that when real people have real conversations and get to know each other and are in that place of a productive conversation, what you're saying is they had a productive conversation. He said, I'm worried about voter fraud, and here's why, right? Here's what's brought me. And the other person said, well, I know, but I'm afraid about voter suppression, and here's why. They were having a productive conversation that led to common ground. And as you said, it's going to have to begin with us, the citizens, because the politicians now have such deep self-interest in keeping us divided that it's going to have to be us, the citizens, coming together and having these conversations and then saying to those who lead us, We really want to have a different kind of way of being with each other. And it takes a lot of courage, as you said, but we'll all be a lot smarter and we'll all have a lot better relationships if we just get curious. And I think that's the heart of your book. And so thank you for writing that. Polina, anything you want to share before we go?
Just want to say thank you, Monica. I think it's really important for us to take away the practical suggestions and really put them to work. It might be scary. You might need to be more resilient and trying and brave, just like Monica mentioned. But unless you go to your family dinners, your soccer games, or those, social events or with your kids and try to get into a psychologically safe space to have these conversations and encourage others to ask questions about your views as a reciprocal way, I think, we won't be able to move past this. But thank you for giving us the great hope, Monica. Thank you for writing such a powerful book. We really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Great. And thank you to our listeners. As you know, please subscribe on whatever platform you're on, share it so others can get these great ideas. We'd love to hear from you. Go to our link tree, which is in the show notes. And we always end these podcasts with reminding you that history is not a destination waiting for us to arrive. What we will one day call history will be the result of what we do right now, including the history of polarization. It's not predetermined that we're going to stay this polarized. What we do now will determine if one day that's the story of this generation. We'll see you next time on The Way Forward.
Thank you for joining us in this episode of the Way Forward Regenerative Conversations podcast. I'm Jim Burke, the producer. If you found this conversation as enlightening and motivating as we did, please subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channels. Your subscription helps us continue bringing these vital discussions to a broader audience. Don't forget to share this episode with your network, and let's work together to build a better world for all generations. Find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, and now on Instagram and YouTube Shorts. Together, we can make a difference. We'd love to hear your feedback on today's episode and any suggestions you have for future guests. Please send your thoughts and recommendations to thewayforwardrc@gmail.com. Your input is invaluable in helping us shape the future of this podcast. Thank you for being part of the Way Forward community.